All right. Well, welcome everybody to the Business of Speaking show. I am your host, Tim McDonald, and today I am joined by Michaela. Alexis, how are you?
I am about halfway through my afternoon iced coffee, so this is like the best time to catch me. I'm in a great mood.
Well, perfect. I'm so glad. This is going to make it a great half an hour here or 25 minutes. But
Just
um,
if I apologize if I talk too fast. That's the only thing.
uh, really quick, one of my first speaking gigs that I got like in front of a big group of people internationally was in Copenhagen. And I asked the organizer, what's one thing I should know? And he told me, everybody in Denmark speaks English, but it's their second language. So try and speak slow.
Like point 0.5 speed on the podcast. Yeah, you got to slow it down for sure.
So yeah, so just remember that if you ever got to go and speak in Denmark.
The things you learn over time as a speaker.
Yes, yes. So for those of you that don't know, really this show is not about what speakers talk about on stage, but it's their journey on how they got to the stage and what they've learned since. So I always like starting off with the first question being, tell us your story of how you got involved in speaking.
Yeah, you know what? I have never been asked that question before. You're so used to hearing the tell me your story, but in regards to speaking, so this is kind of interesting, and I don't know if anybody actually knows this, but when I was little, I was very, very shy, super introverted, hid behind my mom. In fact, a lot of people didn't know that I could speak because I was just really shy. But all of a sudden, once I got into grade 5, grade 6 in elementary school, they started hosting these public speaking competitions. And I would get on stage and I would write my own speeches and then rehearse them. And I was like winning all of these awards and I had all these trophies. And people were shocked that I even like knew how to speak, forget speaking publicly. And so I feel like public speaking has always been part of me. I feel like it's a different world for me. It's like my Narnia. And but it's something that I kind of pushed aside growing up, mostly because I just didn't feel like I didn't even know that that was a career. And I've had, family members that have been in creative industries. My older brother is an author in Canada. And I kind of thought that that wasn't a realistic path for me. And so I did the responsible things, went to university, took legal studies, panicked right before my LSATs and realized that, oh gosh, I being a lawyer is never going to happen for me. I just couldn't imagine myself in that space and kind of fell into marketing, which still had a lot of the elements that I always enjoyed, storytelling and writing and all of these things. And in 2016, I was laid off from the startup that I was working at. And it was about a month before my 30th birthday. And that was such a huge wake up call for me because I felt like I had, well, that I was going to be so much further ahead than I actually was. I would have my career all together and I'd have the big house and the family. And I was looking around and I'm like, hey, hang on a second. I have up until now been playing by all of the rules that I thought I was supposed to follow, and yet I'm miserable. So what am I missing? And so I started writing on LinkedIn, and originally it was about marketing and social media. And then I kind of expanded it into my experiences as a job seeker, fear of failure and rejection and all of these issues that nobody was really talking about on LinkedIn. And over time, people started asking me, I don't know what you're doing on LinkedIn, but can you help my business to whatever it is that you're doing? And so I started training companies and clients on how to authentically tell their story and tell their brand story. And I realized as soon at I still remember the very first workshop that I hosted with my clients. I got on stage, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is this thing that I have been doing since I was 8 years old that I never thought would be a job, and here I am. And it was the same feelings that I had back then. And I knew in that moment that the company that I had been creating at the time, I was building an agency that was a social media management agency, but I was also offering training, that I needed to step away from that and focus 100% on speaking and training companies in that way. And that was probably the hardest thing that I've ever done in my career, but also the most rewarding, because now I get to do what I love every day. And sometimes I'm talking to one person, other times I'm talking to 2,000 people, but the feelings are still the same. That like aha moment that you see in somebody's eyes when you feel like you've communicated something that they didn't understand, and now they're able to do that thing, right?
I just need to go back because I'm so curious. Where did you go to school that you actually had public speaking
Is that
contests?
not a thing? So I'm Canadian. I am Canadian. I'm from Ottawa, Canada. And yeah, we had contests every year in our school. And it was like a very, very big deal. It was very competitive. You had to create an original piece. Like you couldn't do like a book study or something like that. It had to be a specific topic, and then you'd have to create all the content behind it. You have to rehearse it, and it was a ton of fun. Back then I was a lot more nervous than I am now, mostly because I just didn't speak openly, and so getting on stage was totally different for me. But I loved it. To this day I still probably have my plaques and trophies somewhere in my mom's house.
I mean, I grew up in suburban Chicago, and I
That
think
wasn't
the
a thing.
first, yeah, no, we never had that. I mean, we
Oh,
didn't, we had debate, I think, in high school.
okay.
And then I think my first public speaking course was in college. So
That's too bad, because I think at a young age, to learn how to communicate and storytell and like rehearse things and and communicate in that way is just it's really rewarding when you're that young.
oh, I can imagine. So now I'm going to fast forward. I was just like so curious about that because it was so foreign to me that you did that at a young age.
Someone's
But
got to let me know if that's a Canadian thing or an American thing, because now I'm very curious. Maybe
well,
it
I
is just a
am too.
Canadian thing.
Yeah, no, I'm curious about it too. But you said something very interesting to me about when you kind of went out on your own full time, that it
Mhm.
was both the scariest thing and the most rewarding thing.
Mhm.
What was so scary about it?
I am 100% not a risk taker. I am not that person that, growing up, they wanted to be Steve Jobs, they wanted to change the world. And I am just not a risk taker. And so I call myself a reluctant entrepreneur. I felt like I got to a place where I could no longer ignore this voice that was telling me that I had this purpose that I needed to go follow and I needed to go and do this thing. And so that's why it was really scary, because I had been an employee for such a long time and I had followed the rules for such a long time that I didn't know what life is going to be like as a rule breaker. I mean, in the speaking world, you really are the kind of the master of your own path. And that to me was probably the most terrifying thing, but it's been it's been an incredible journey.
So how have you really taken that from like taking that leap, right? And
Yeah.
taking that risk. And what have you found that's kind of worked for you that has led you to still be doing that and not running back to getting somebody to pay your salary for you?
Oh gosh. I mean, I wish that I could say that I have had this really smooth, like elegant journey in the speaking world, but it's been rocky. I feel like I've been driving a car without wheels on a dirt road or something like that. In fact, one of my first gigs was I was auditioning for TEDx here in Ottawa, and at that time, I had been speaking to smaller groups. So I kind of felt like I'd mastered my stage fright. I had it all together. And I get on the stage, and for those that have you done a TEDx?
Not a TEDx, no.
Okay. So TEDx, I don't know if they're all like this, but for the most part, you end up on a stage and you have all these like lights in your face, and then you can't actually see the judges panel. And so that completely threw me off. And people don't realize how much we rely on facial expressions and body language to speak. And so when you don't have that, unless you're an advanced speaker or an experienced speaker, that's really, really tough. And I swear, I felt like I was on that stage for a year because I had my whole thing rehearsed and I kept forgetting my lines, kept forgetting my words to the point where I couldn't remember my name. I really felt like the whole building was on fire. That's the only way to explain it. And then at one point, I had to just pull the paper out of my back pocket and just read through the rest and just wait until they let me get off the stage. And I mean, it was absolutely horrendous. I went to my car, I cried my eyes out. I went home and then I sat there and I'm like, where do I go from here? Because nobody knows that I was auditioning. So I could kind of just go on with my life and pretend it didn't happen. Or maybe I can use this and empower myself by sharing this as the first step, not as a final chapter. And so I chose the latter because I am insane, apparently. And I reached out to the event organizers and I asked them for the audition video. And they were very suspicious. At the time, I kind of had a big network on LinkedIn. So they were hoping that I wasn't trying to kind of weasel my way onto the TEDx stage. Obviously, they had never been asked, can I have my failed audition tape before? But once I explained kind of the purpose behind me having it and sharing it online, they gladly sent it over to me and I shared it on LinkedIn in front of 100,000 people. And I said, this is just the beginning for me and I want you to hold me accountable. And, when we talk about things at work, I think that's what works for me. It's all of these things that I've been worried about, all of these things that have made me very vulnerable, being very open about those things has really empowered me to move past them. I used to have agoraphobia. I struggled with agoraphobia for a year and a half where I couldn't leave my house and I had a fear of crowds and crowded spaces. And now I'm not right now in the middle of a pandemic, but I'm an international speaker, which makes no sense in my brain. But that's how powerful our thoughts can be in determining our reality. And so it's been a long journey to get to that point, but really it's been sharing that story about agoraphobia. That's something that I didn't talk about for years because I was worried that it would make me look weak. Stage fright is something that was always a huge concern of mine. And once it happened, sharing it kind of released me from that fear. And actually, one of my very first keynotes was at the Sony Center in Toronto. And I had practiced it a million times. I was terrified though. I was struggling to even leave my hotel room to go there because who has their first like major keynote at the Sony Center in front of thousands of people? And I get on stage and I look at the crowd and I made a split-second decision. I said, this is my first keynote. And it was all entrepreneurs. And so all of a sudden I felt the whole energy shift between I'm a performer and I need to do this a certain way and it needs to be perfect to now I understood that the audience was on my side. And that made the rest of the talk go very smoothly. And that's something that I've relied on since then. I mean, I'm naturally very awkward, but I own the awkwardness.
I love that. So I'm just thinking like, since you first had that moment, right? And as you move forward, how have you seen yourself kind of evolve
Mhm.
and what's some of your biggest takeaways that, as you've looked at your journey in this arena, for, how it's kept you moving and growing and evolving. And at the same time, I think kind of what you're looking forward to next.
Yeah, I think the biggest growth that I've seen in myself is that I've finally, for the most part, moved away from this, oh my gosh, the building is on fire kind of phase. I remember in the very beginning, it was just about surviving. I just got to get through it, right? And that's hard because normally we're not constantly faced with things that scare us. So we don't have naturally a lot of practice dealing with all this energy and all of this nervous energy and all of this adrenaline that's kind of coursing through us right before we step on stage. And so I would say about the first year and a half, it was a lot of, okay, just got to learn how to like get used to this adrenaline rush. And actually, so the last time that I spoke at Social Media Marketing World in March, and something really weird happened, and I realized that I've kind of overcome that phase, in that I had practiced my rehearsed my talk. And normally when I rehearse my talk, I kind of cut down on the time. So if it takes me 30 minutes just kind of speaking it at home, it's probably going to take me about 20 minutes on stage, because I talk so fast when I'm nervous. And what happened the last time I spoke was actually the opposite. And I was like, what? And actually, I had another speaking friend that said that's how you know when you're more experienced, because your voice, like, you're more relaxed on stage. And so you take your time a little bit more instead of just trying to get through the whole thing and then get out the stage. So I've definitely noticed that, and just a lot more comfort in being on the stage and improvising. That's been a big thing too. Before, I used to have a very strict script that I followed. And now I feel that I'm more likely to kind of go with the flow and read the energy of the room and kind of adapt to it. So that's been really good. And then in terms of takeaways, um, oh gosh, there's so many of them. It's, I think, like anything, it's just a lot of practice. I kind of thought going into it that I knew everything that I needed to know, and realized really quickly that no, I'm just at the very beginning phases of this. And yes, I have a natural passion for public speaking, but there's so much that goes into it. And it's really fascinating kind of hearing from other people about how, I have a friend that has taken dance lessons to learn how to move on the stage more. I know somebody else that's working with a voice coach to learn how to use different tones of voice. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. So I'm really looking forward to um, continuing to grow with all of these different things in mind, to be able to relay a message more effectively.
Oh, that's great. I think Lucy Bloom, I don't know if you know her. She's in Australia, but she actually told me that she works with a voice coach who's an opera
Yeah,
singer, and it's like her craft. That's how she looks at it. So I don't
cool.
think you're alone
Yeah,
in looking at that next step and next phase. Um,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah, but so if you were to like look at what you know now and were able to give somebody who just wanted to get starting in speaking today a piece of advice, what would it be?
Probably that they don't want you to fail. Uh, I remember when I first went on stage, I kind of felt like there was this wall, there was this barrier between myself and the person sitting in the seat. And I kind of envisioned them like arms crossed and like sitting there judging me, when in fact, actually, they don't want you to fail. And most people want you to succeed, because if you don't, it's awkward for both of you, right? Um, and certainly there are ways to, if there is kind of that barrier, to relate a little bit more to people by using humor. I love cracking jokes right off the bat, just to kind of bring down that guard. Using relatability, things like saying, "This is my first keynote," or "Wow, I've never spoken to so many people in my life," right? A lot of people are afraid to do those things, but those are the things that kind of put us in a place where we are more connected to our audience. So I would definitely say, know that most people want you to succeed. The audience isn't against you. It's very cliche, but be yourself. I mean, I've been told a million times that I needed to be more like this person or like this person, and I can only be me. That's the only person that I can effectively be. And if I try to be somebody else, it doesn't sound good, it doesn't feel right. Um, and there is only one you. I remember hearing an interview by a copywriter, and he was talking about this course that he was thinking about creating, but he's like, there are so many courses out there on copywriting. I don't know if I should. And he had a friend that said to him, what if your voice was the only one that that person could hear? And I always think of that, right? If people want to learn about LinkedIn or personal branding, they can Google it. They can go and find another speaker that could share the same information. But I have my own style. I have my own antidotes. I have my own stories. I have my own personality. And so don't worry about the competition or somebody knowing more than you do, because there is only one you. And I think that, in a strange sense, we all kind of have this responsibility to share the lessons that we've learned in our lifetime and the stories that we've experienced with other people, so that they can avoid the same mistakes, or that they can succeed as well. And so I like to tell people to think not so much about yourself and your own ego, but think about the value that you're bringing to the people that you're speaking to and how you can change their lives.
Oh, that was amazing. I can't thank you enough. But before we go, let everybody know how they can find you, how they can connect with you, get in touch with you.
Well, I am always hanging out on LinkedIn, so that is probably the easiest place. You can connect with me personally. It's just Michaela Alexis. It's Michael with an A. Or you can visit my company page, which is the same name, which is very confusing, I know, but that's where you can find all my LinkedIn training and speaking and all of that stuff. Or you can visit my website at micalexis.com. I also hang out on Instagram, but it can get a little weird there because I do it a lot of like traveling. And so sometimes I'm very, very tired. So don't judge me for my Instagram stories, but it is a lot of fun hanging out there as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Michaela, and everybody watching. If you don't know, I'm going to end the YouTube live video and keep Michaela on and record one question that will only be available to email subscribers at speaking.business. So if you go to speaking.business, join our community and sign up for the email list, you will be getting exclusive content from all the speakers on the show. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.